Hello, you're watching TelecomTV. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content. What are the current challenges that telcos face when it comes to deployment of openRAN, and what are the economic upsides? What's the likely roadmap for openRAN in commercial deployments at scale and with high density? And what role will systems integrators play in bringing this technology to market? Well, joining me now to discuss these issues are Mark Henry, Technology and Business Strategy Director at BT, Manish Mangal, Global Business Head, 5G and Network Services at Tech Mahindra, and Azhar Sayeed, Senior Director, Global Solutions Architecture at Red Hat. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this program. My first question, and let me start by asking this to you, Manish. Why are network operators interested in Open RAN architectures, and how has the Open RAN market developed up until now?
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. So the reason for why the operators are interested in OpenRAN is quite obvious. It's about total cost of ownership and bringing agility and innovation to the radio networks at a much faster speed. When you look at the amount of capex and the opex that gets spent by a operator, a large part of that, 60 to 70% of that, goes into the radio networks. Hence, it makes logical sense to find ways to innovate, find ways to automate that part of the architecture. So, by bringing open networks, creating the disruptive supply chain options, bringing more smaller, nimble, innovative ideas to production rather faster, all those things really create the ability for the operators to drive not just the operational savings, but also bring in new feature and capabilities that becomes a norm of how you enable new range of services with metaverse type of applications will be required. So that's the reason why everybody is so excited about it, and hence we are as well. In terms of the progress, we define the progress in sort of a three categories. Is the standard mature enough that anybody can actually start building products around it? The answer to that is yes. The second is, are there products starting to become available in the market that have the maturity to get operational? The answer to that, yes. Almost every OEM in the industry today has announced Open RAN availability on their roadmap, or they have it today. And the third is, are these platforms ready to be deployed in a scalable fashion, and can that be integrated? And that's where we have been very aggressively focused over the last 3 years in creating an integration framework of this Open RAN ecosystem. And we believe it's ready, and we have been participating into this already now for a couple of years. So progress from our vantage point, from my vantage point, is it's a norm now. And in 2 or 3 years from now, we wouldn't be talking about whether we should deploy Open RAN or not. That will become a de facto of every deployment in the world.
Thank you, Manish, for that. Yes, progress being made. So, how does all this fit in with telco cloud strategies? Azhar, what are you seeing at the moment? Is there a link between the increasing cloudification of telco networks and growing interest in disaggregated RAN systems?
Absolutely, Guy. What we've seen in terms of our conversations with customers is cloud footprint is expanding from data centers out towards the edge. And Open RAN is actually playing a catalyst role in terms of deployment of edge. Because as you start to extend that cloud platform more towards the edge and the far edge, because you want common operational models, because all of the things that Manish was just talking about in terms of providing better economies of scale, operational models, automation, extending that cloud platform towards the edge makes a lot more sense. And when you do that, now you have a choice to go deploy appliances again, or to actually leverage this particular platform to deploy new innovative services. And so Open RAN kind of plays very well into that mix. In fact, one could argue that Open RAN might be deploying better edge game plan, or other people argue that edge is enabling telcos to look at Open RAN as a really viable option. So I think both of them are true in some ways or another, depending from whatever the vantage point a telco is coming from. And some of the strategies that they've started to adopt is, it's not necessary that they need to go revamp their entire RAN infrastructure. They can actually start piecemeal. They can start to look at additional of new bands as they're doing in the RAN space, and then map those into the cloud infrastructure and start to deploy this RAN CU and RAN DU. And then over a period of time, look at how do you migrate the existing E node Bs and G node Bs into this Open RAN forward. Another is to completely look at, well, you start with Open RAN in a millimeter wave band first. And so there are different strategies that telcos are adopting depending on where they are in their infrastructure and how much open their infrastructure is.
Thank you, Azhar. And as you say, the different strategies very much depend on the individual telco and where they are on this journey. Manish, let me return to you for a moment. What are the economic advantages for operators that choose to adopt an Open RAN architecture?
Look at from both OpEx and the CapEx perspective. The when we look at the deployment of the infrastructure the first time, being able to put a common cloud architecture across not just the radio but the core has a huge advantage from a cost perspective for the infrastructure itself, right? If you have a common cloud, if you have a common COTS hardware, if you have the commonality of not just deployment but the operations of that cloud, it makes a lot more simpler in terms of how the infrastructure would need to be deployed, and that translates into the capex and the opex savings on the infra side. The second part is really around the operating expenses of the radio network. We have simplified now the architecture where the site actually looks a lot more simple. The time it takes and the kind of skill set it takes to get a site up and running is much, much, much better. Or much lower capabilities are required to be on the field. You can actually remotely provision, remotely manage it. The third one is really biggest one in my mind, which is how long does it take for a site to come on air? And that's really access to revenues faster. And that makes a large impact beyond the savings, because if you can get a site up and running in 30 days, 40 days from the plan to actually get it to the revenue bearing traffic, it's a huge advantage in terms of driving the revenues faster. So all those translates into a total cost of ownership that is lower capex, lower OpEx, and the faster to the revenue. And that's really what all the operators are looking to do.
Great. So a lot of positives here. Azhar, you'd like to add to what Manish has been saying?
Yeah, I think Manish raises actually a number of important points. But if I just want to frame those things, I would frame it as automation is really key, and automation can only happen with the disaggregation. Once you disaggregate the hardware platform from the software components, and you extend that particular cloud platform, cloud infrastructure out from the data center into the edge and the far edge, you can actually automate in exactly the same way you're used to automating the data center. You can apply the same set of policies. You don't have to have two different operational models. And so all those really add up very, very quickly. And now you're deploying not just 10 sites, 100 sites, you're deploying thousands and tens of thousands of sites. And these zero touch provisioning models that we've developed with our partners, like Manish was actually talking about, is really critical in terms of scaling that particular infrastructure, and automation really enables this.
Great, thank you. Well, let me turn to Mark now. Mark, let's come to you for a CSP's perspective here. When do you think Open RAN will become a viable option for what we might call traditional telecom operators such as BT? And what particular factors do you think are going to influence that timeline?
It's very much tied to the decision making about centralizing functions. So if we can disaggregate and we're sure that the ORAN interfaces are mature and secure, then we'll plan our network evolution around when to centralize, which it kind of puts the brakes on an ORAN rollout for an operator like us. And the reason for that is obviously we made a large investment in our existing RAN infrastructure, which has distributed baseband components, the CU and the DU effectively on a site. But over time, we would look to take advantage of Open RAN technologies where we can do disaggregation. So the path to do that, though, we would look at that as an evolution over time, and we would learn from Open RAN implementations as we go. So as you might know, we already have a RIC trial running right now. It's the only new component in Open RAN, and we're taking some good learnings from that. And it is a powerful tool for our network going forward. Well, what we are doing right now is focusing on Open RAN for some in-building systems where we're going to go and do something new anyway. And we'll try and do that with Open RAN compliant platforms. We'll take some learnings from that. And then, as Azhar said, we'll do some small cells, for example, and we'll do that in a different way than we've done so far. So we have some trials, CRAN trials running in Leeds at the moment, where we're looking at centralization in a classical way, but we're taking the learnings from that, and then we would apply what we know about openRAN solutions going forward. So we'll have these learnings from in-building systems, neutral host, small cells, and then at the point we come to reinvest in our macro infrastructure, we'd be trying to target centralization and disaggregation. And at that point, we're really hopeful that openRAN solutions, the entire solution, is mature. When we talk about maturity, the interface specification might be mature, but we need mature products that will support all the kinds of products and services that we have to deliver over those networks, not least of which is the emergency services network.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That's absolutely fascinating. Azhar, building on from what Mark was saying there, are there ways in which openRAN we can help network operators by using openRAN to introduce new functionality and to optimize their network capabilities?
Absolutely, Guy. Two things that Mark pointed out. One is the introduction of RIC as part of the openRAN framework, RAN Intelligent Controller, to be able to manage those RAN entities and nodes, and to be able to introduce new innovative services using near real-time and non-real-time RIC. That is part of the openRAN architecture. That is actually a huge advantage where you now can actually drop in third-party optimization applications on the RIC, on the RAN Intelligent Controller, and then provide a different type of service that you didn't ever have before on that particular RAN. So for example, let's say you are providing emergency services. That was the example Mark used, and I think that's a great example. And you now want to actually tune and ensure that the RAN infrastructure is available to provide those type of services for drones or services for emergency personnel with respect to their calls as a matter of priority on the infrastructure. And you can now take care of that using these type of intelligent applications that can actually monitor those components, tune the RAN components, do that beamforming that's needed, and provide those set of services. So that's one really huge advantage of doing this. The second big advantage of actually deploying openRAN, in our opinion, and in terms of how we can work with providers, is to actually look at, again, going back to the point both Manish and Mark made, which is, first, you don't have to introduce it everywhere. You can actually look at those CRAN sites to begin with, where you already have some level of aggregation, and then adopt a strategy where you can extend that particular cloud platform, build that automation model, and then use that to host a bunch of CUs. Once you host a bunch of CUs there, you host UPFs there, then you host edge computing there, edge applications there, because now you can short circuit traffic or locally offload traffic to those edge applications in that. So these strategies become really useful in terms of how openRAN can be introduced, looking at where those densities are, where those aggregation sites are, looking at those CRAN sites, introducing new capabilities via edge, introducing new capabilities via RIC.
Thanks, Azhar. And Mark, continuing this discussion, continuing what Azhar's been saying about how we go about introducing openRAN, how will systems integrators play a role in bringing openRAN to the market? How will openRAN systems be integrated with existing RAN deployments?
Yeah, I think system integrators have a large role to play. If you look at, the burden of integrating these multi-vendor systems between different nodes in a disaggregated RAN, and also in the software stack vertically, it's not something most operators are going to be able to pick up. They don't have the skills and experience. And if you look around the world right now, we're in a bit of a skills shortage. There are, however, operators around the world today who do a lot of that themselves. So it's not going to be uniform, I would say. There are some operators that write their own scheduler, for example. I think some operators, the larger ones who have scale, may look to take that on, but there's a lot of operators around the world who will struggle with that kind of integration burden. There's a whole heap of complexity in here that we as operators don't have enough experience of. And we do in our kind of IT environments, but it's not the same for carrier grade telco cloud, for example. And the same will apply in Cloud RAN, especially when we disaggregate, open up new interfaces. We're going to create additional complexity, and we're going to need help with that. In BT, we haven't decided how we would deal with that complexity yet, but that's part of the learnings, as I said, as we move forward over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Mark. And Azhar, as Mark says, there's a lot of complexity involved here, and very much depends on who the telco is as to how much help they're going to need.
Yeah, I think, if I look at openRAN, let's face it, even if it's one RAN vendor, you have a radio vendor, you have a platform vendor, you have a software vendor, and then you have some management applications. So you got at least 4 or 5 different vendors right there just to deploy that openRAN. So integration becomes key, and then integration. So who does that integration? Now, what we as Red Hat have been trying to do is work with our partners like Tech Mahindra, right? Manish can probably talk a lot about what he's doing in terms of his software factory and things like that. But that's where we can pre-bake certain things. We can actually build an ecosystem of partners, bring them together, pre-bake a solution, and say, okay, here's a reference architecture, or here's a reference framework that we can provide to our customers. That reference framework can be then taken into the customer environment and then tuned according to all of the other capabilities that the customer needs and interfaced to those different types of environments. Now, there is nothing that will work universally across the board exactly the same with every single customer, because every single environment is going to be a little bit different. So I think this is where the ecosystem conversation is critical. This is where integration conversation is critical. And this is where these type of reference patterns and reference architectures become really important to be able to showcase that it can be done, and it can be done in a scalable, meaningful way.
And Azhar, you mentioned how critical the issue of integration is, but what about security? Are there any specific security challenges associated with Open RAN deployments? And if so, what are they?
Great question, Guy. We have, actually worked on a very good white paper with some of our partners, and published it as part of ORAN, particularly around managing security with respect to cloudification of the RAN. I mean, as the cloud platform extends into the RAN, what are the things that we need to do at an infrastructure layer in the context of security, but also what can we leverage in the context of 3GPP security models that are already inbuilt into the 5G core SBA architecture, and the RAN architecture that you can actually leverage and build that particular model. So I think the concern around security is a little bit overblown, in my opinion, because people tend to think, well, I'm extending my cloud platform all the way and I'm a little bit nervous, right? That's basically what they're really trying to say. But look, cloud is already extended towards the edge right now with many different deployment models. Hybrid cloud model, public cloud is already being extended through various different mechanisms that each of the public cloud provider have, using Anthos or Azure Edge or Wavelength and so on and so forth. And so people know already how to build these type of distributed platforms or distributed cloud infrastructure and make that secure from an infrastructure layer perspective. Then, of course, you also have to apply rules and policies to ensure you're not allowing config changes in those. And automation, again, becomes critical in terms of managing security there, because you can, through automation, you can constantly check for violations and compliance, violations on the security posture of both the local infrastructure or the edge infrastructure, as well as the core infrastructure.
Great, thank you very much, Azhar. Now, Manish, we've covered a lot of ground during our discussion today, but I'd like to put one final question to you. How do you suggest that network operators approach the potential deployment of Open RAN technology, and how important will ecosystem partners be in helping them meet their goals?
Mark hit the point very well when he said that we are looking at where are we doing new things and we adopt the Open RAN architecture there. And I think that's one of the most common strategies, which is cap and grow, right? So let's split the segment from greenfield versus brownfield. When you look at the greenfield, the decisions are very simple and straightforward. Everybody is adopting openRAN, and I think that has clearly given the confidence to the industry that openRAN is a real thing and it's something that is going to stay. When it comes to the brownfield operators, the most fundamental strategy is cap and grow, which means that every dollar that I invest from now on going forward should be towards an open RAN architecture. That's a first in principle agreement, in principle approach that has to be taken. The second thing is that, and Mark hit again along with Azhar a very critical point, which is integration point of view. And let me just kind of shed a little bit more light there, because while on one hand we have created a tremendous amount of opportunities for industry to create value by disaggregating everything, disaggregating cloud, radio units, DUs, the CUs, and everything associated with it, real-time breaks, non-real-time breaks. We are creating a lot of components, and hence it becomes even more important to have an integration framework to be ready. And this is really where we believe that simplifying the integration will be very critical to drive the operationalization of an open RAN architecture. And that's where we have been focused in creating that integration studios where things can be integrated together, pre-integrated, pre-packaged, hence the complexity of the deployment is lower. And that's where I believe that once, if the operator takes the strategy that it's a cap and grow, then it's a job of us as an ecosystem to be able to come together, integrate the components, not only within the open RAN architecture, which is horizontal and vertical integration, but also with the coexistence for everything else. How do you exist with the OSS architecture that is already there in the network? So I believe personally that the framework that we have defined is very, very robust in being able to integrate a horizontal, vertical open RAN, as well as with the coexistence with the existing platforms in the network. And I think that's where the operators should go. They should adopt an integration framework. Not doesn't have to be ours. It just have to be one, and adopt the ORAN as an architecture principle and a philosophy, and then every dollar to be investment into that category.
Excellent. Thank you, Manish. Well, that brings our discussion nicely to a close. Thank you all for joining us today and sharing your views and insights.